The Canadian government has harsh regulations when it comes to advertising any cannabis products. The law prohibits promoting cannabis in any way that can be seen as appealing to young people. That means no billboards, no newspapers, no spelling OG Kush in the sky. With all these limitations, where does this leave this blossoming new sector?
So when it comes to advertising cannabis in Canada, the really interesting thing about the way the laws and the regulations are written, and it's something Health Canada will actually state regularly, is their goal is to limit promotions as much as possible. It's more broadly that they don't want you to promote, and there are very limited ways in which you can. So the two big ways in which you can are informational promotions or brand preference driving promotions. So what does that mean? Well, it would be an informational promotion to say that our product is organic. It would be brand preference driving to say that we have better strains or more unique genetics than our competitors. Now, there is a bit of debate right now in the industry what can be done in places where young people can see them. Because, for example, you can put a brand element on a hoodie or on a baseball cap, and that's deemed compliant. So if you're allowed to put it on an object or a thing that's not cannabis, would that thing also include a billboard? And there's been some indication from Health Canada that it potentially could, but there's restrictions on what else you can put on there. There are other activities that we know definitely are compliant. For example, targeted emails or mail that the recipients are only of age, or if something is happening behind a completely age-gated environment. So I guess when it comes to asking why cannabis is being treated differently than prescription drugs or alcohol, I think there's, a century of stigma attached to cannabis as well that influenced the way policymakers actually went about drafting this law. And, I think that sometimes we maybe have to give this a little bit of time. In an ideal world, would cannabis love to operate under the same rules as alcohol? Of course. And as a marketer, that would be great because there's a lot more ways to play with how you're going to reach your consumer. I mean, of course, as a cannabis marketer, I would love to see Canada reconsider the restrictions, or at least as the industry matures, allow for more pre-approvals, have somebody like the Ad Standards Council pre-approve ads for cannabis in the way that they do with alcohol.
It seems that the Canadian cannabis companies are working with their hands tied behind their backs compared to the United States cannabis companies. With cannabis not being legal under federal law in the US, each state has its own rules on how their respective companies can market and endorse their products to the public.
Some states do allow the television advertising and print advertising. The specific rules pretty much vary from state to state, but the largest one is primarily making sure that the advertising is not geared towards minors and people under the age of 21, and that it is not geared towards people that are not within a legal state. While this is completely reasonable, and I think in fact shows that the cannabis industry is very interested in maintaining good public safety and following the rules. For instance, alcohol companies aren't subjected to this despite the fact that their product is significantly more dangerous. I think that some companies are having problems with that because it makes it more difficult for them to be able to bring their product to market and be able to let people know about it. In addition, private companies such as Facebook, which allow for advertisers to be able to limit and focus their advertising based on geographic location and age, are often denied the ability to advertise their businesses and their products on those platforms. Generally, the rules for cannabis marketing and advertising are much more strict than they are for alcohol and tobacco, and certainly much more strict than they are for pharmaceutical companies.
The cannabis industry is still fairly new and has to prove itself before it can get any leeway in the marketing space. And I don't know about you, but I for one would rather see cannabis commercials over all these prescription drug commercials that end off in lists of hundreds of side effects, and it always ends up with anal bleeding. What's with the anal bleeding? I'm tired of the anal bleeding. For Midas Live, I'm Adamo Barbieri.